Alrighty, so this is the review for the social problems exam 2. All right, so for chapter 8, when I'm talking about drugs and culture, just the idea that what understandings we have about drugs are culturally specific and that they tend to have different meanings across different cultures. When it comes to drugs and immigration, remember we talked about how a lot of drugs were related to immigrant groups, and that's when they became criminalized, right? That's what we're talking about there. Prohibition, organized crime. There's that video clip I had for you guys there about prohibition. Just watch that. You'll be good on that one. Why do people use drugs? There's those 5 reasons listed. So I'm going to ask you, you know, to just kind of test your knowledge of those 5 reasons why people, therapeutic use, escape, conformity, spirituality, that kind of stuff. Anyway, when it comes to stimulants and cannabis, what I'm going to ask there is just kind of like a definitional thing. So knowing which is which. The relationship between drug abuse and homelessness, just the idea we talked about in class, how some people become homeless because of their drug issues, while other people become addicted to drugs as a result of being homeless. So that it's kind of a cyclical issue. When it comes to strategies to control drugs, these are the different ones I'm going to kind of, give you the choices between. So, you should know the difference between treatment, education, interdiction, and prosecution. So that should be pretty obvious. Treatment being like specifically to treat someone that's addicted to drugs, education as a prevention tool before someone starts using drugs, interdiction, right, which is trying to stop the flow of drugs across a border, and prosecution is just, actually charging someone with a crime and bringing them in front of the criminal justice system. Mandatory minimum sentences are just, sentences that have a certain minimum amount of time in prison that have really come about due to the war on drugs. And so, because of them, there's certain criteria where, like, let's say you have a certain amount of, like, a small amount of a drug, but you also have a gun, right? Because of those two together, there's often a mandatory minimum sentence that's put in place. So, a judge doesn't get to choose the length of the sentence that they give you based on the merit of your case, but it's something that's kind of been put in place by legislators. Okay, so when it comes to war on drugs, what I'm looking for there is just, you know, um, just knowing the basic difference between the Nixon era and the Reagan era as far as, you know, um, how funding was spent, right? Meaning during the Nixon era when he started the funding for the war on drugs, he was still kind of splitting that up between treatment, education, enforcement, but not as much with Reagan, who shifted a lot of the funding towards enforcement. Decriminalization is just removing penalties for drug offenses, making them legal, right? Okay, chapter 6. Just some things about the the specific crimes that we talked about. So first one, rape. What I wanted you to know there is that only 28% of people who experience this crime actually report it to the police nationally, which is crazy. So just meaning, if you know that less than a third of cases are reported to the police, that's all you have to know for that. Um, let's see, street crime and it's how it's related to race and ethnicity. So, you know, this idea that as much as street crime is essentialized to be crimes that involve people of color, most street crime arrests do involve white suspects of some kind. There are a lot of white suspects that are stopped or detained, but often they don't end up in jail prosecuted by district attorneys in the same way. Some communities of color tend to be hyper policed so that race and ethnicity become related to which people are being put in prison more, right? Because we're so racially segregated in the way that our society lives. And, so for example, for that, while African Americans are only 13% of the population, they're highly overrepresented in arrests, especially for certain drugs, where they're overrepresented. So, That's all I want you to know for that stuff. When it comes to street crime deprivation, just meaning that if you're deprived and you're not being given the kind of basic necessities like a decent school, a decent, community without having to live in fear of violence or recrimination, then that can lead to a lot of hostility and distrust towards the larger social system. And especially if police are, perceived to be unresponsive, then that can lead to, a distrust of the police as well, or, this idea of the system. Alrighty. Racial prejudice, just, obviously, again, going back to the idea of the representation, the overrepresentation of people of color in the criminal justice system, at every facet of the criminal justice system, people of color are overrepresented. When it comes to who's profiled, who ends up being stopped and searched and detained, who ends up going in front of a judge, who ends up being sentenced by a judge, who ends up in prison, at every level, predominantly, overrepresented by people of color. So, this has a lot to do with the idea that over time in our country, we can't separate this from the historical truths that people of color have long been vilified and, associated with criminality. So it becomes a social script that we start to adhere our, you know, belief system to, that some people are just inherently more criminal than others, which of course we know is not actually true, but it's one of those kind of social myths that become reality the more people say that it's true. Anywho, when it comes to hate crimes, I'm just looking for the definition for that one, right? Just a crime against a person, property, or society motivated by the bias that that person has towards that group. Um, Corporate crimes, just the kind of examples of what that could be, right? So basically everything from that slide. So the fact that it could be gross negligence, like knowing that something's really unsafe and selling it anyway, like we're talking about cigarettes, um, is basically has a cost that costs way more than all property crimes and street crimes, but it really isn't considered that deviant. And typically, corporate crimes are crimes that people do while they're like at work, right? Um, let's see. Institutional violence is just violence carried out by the government against others, right? Versus anti-state violence, it would be. Um, yeah, so institutional violence is that's carried out by the government. Mass murder versus serial murder, just the difference. Mass murder is killing, several people at once, versus serial killing is killing several people, but over time in different incidents. Let's see. When it comes to the mass media and violence, just the idea that a lot of research has shown that watching a lot of violence in the media can often not just encourage, but just desensitize us towards seeing violence in real life. When it comes to guns and violence, from that slide, all I was really pointing out there was that leading cause of death part. Hint, that's what I'm looking for, is that gun violence is a leading cause of death for African American and Latino males 18 to 35. Courts, just the idea that the majority of court cases are settled through plea bargaining, which goes against our kind of scripts about how the criminal justice system does work or should work. When it comes to punishment, I'm just looking at the different kinds there. So, what's the difference between retribution, deterrence, rehabilitation, and societal protections, right? So, retribution being kind of a idea of revenge, right? Punishing someone because they did something bad. Deterrence is trying to punish someone so that they won't do it again, or that it'll make it so other people won't do it. Rehabilitation is what we pretend to do, which is where you actually you know, rehabilitate a person, make them better, so that they don't reoffend in the future. And societal protection is this idea like we got to lock people away to keep them away from all of us to keep society safe. Alrighty, chapter 10. All right, types of political systems. I'm just looking for you knowing the difference between a democracy, authoritarianism, and a monarchy. Oh, and socialism, right? Which are just the kind of very basic systems. A monopoly and an oligopoly. I never get to say that. It's awesome. So just that a monopoly is a domination of a market by one company, right? While an oligopoly is when you have the domination of a market by a few companies, kind of like we talked about in class, those media conglomerates, that there's very few media conglomerates that control over 98+% of print, airwaves, ads, all of it. So we are kind of being shaped, like our culture, our values are being shaped by the media that is being released by these six companies, right? Like that kind of idea that it's a limited number, but it's still similar to a monopoly. Okay, conglomerates are just corporations that are huge, that are made up of several smaller corporations. So I gave you like the PepsiCo example in that slide. Um, typically, you can see them in that example I gave you, and also like media companies. Super PACs are just political action committees that raise unlimited money for candidates, but they are not allowed to actually work directly with the candidate. So that's why they're allowed to take in as much money that is like dark money, meaning that you don't have to necessarily show where it came from. Political movement and social change. What I'm looking for there is that, if you really want to change anything and progress human society past the status quo of normalcy, then you have to have some sort of political movement, right? Social change doesn't happen because oppressors decide, you know what, we'll just give someone rights. All right, so for the gender gap, that's going to be, the tendency for women and men to have different opinions about certain issues, and different candidates typically, right? So we talked about this a little bit before, how um, women are more likely to support more liberal candidates, while men are more likely to support more conservative candidates because of the issues that women favor, more issues related to the welfare of children and families, versus men, more our central issues of gun rights and things of that nature tend to be more conservative. So there's that difference. Alrighty. Let's see, the importance of work. So the idea there that work is more than just the income. I mean, obviously it's the income, but it also gives you some meaning, right? It gives you part of your adult identity. So we get more out of work than just money. We also get, part of our self-esteem and, kind of a measure of who we are. All right. Structural changes. So, just the what happened when the information revolution took place. So, just meaning that, there was this invention of computer technology, and I mean, of course, they mean back in the day when it was like as big as a room, right? But really, from that time on, right, from the microchip on, this is when we started to get different kinds of jobs, right? New white collar jobs. So, yeah, basically, you get the service sector jobs kind of coming out of that. And it really changes the way that Americans work. Let's see, structural changes, deindustrialization. So deindustrialization, just the idea that because of industries leaving through globalization to move to other places, um, plants closed, they left, so there was less jobs and those kind of things. And that caused a lot of problems with unemployment, of just people not being able to find jobs to replace the jobs that left. Globalization, I'm just looking for the definition there. The expansion of economic activity around the world with little regard for national borders. Okay, just the difference between Marx's view and Weber's view of workplace alienation. That Marx was looking at how capitalism alienates workers from, basically their job itself, because they don't get any control over their job, from the products they make, because he was looking at it in a time period where people were making physical products, but he said they didn't get to control how they made it or what they made. so it was alienating, that capitalism alienates workers from each other, right? So workers tend to not, get beaten down and not supportive of each other. And in a way, because you don't get to do something that you're passionate about, it alienates you from your human potential. Weber really talked about how the alienation that comes from capitalism comes from the rationalization of society, or what he later talks about, he calls bureaucracy, right? That dun 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 bureaucracy. Um, the kind of impersonal focus on efficiency, making things calculatable by computers, really not worried about people's feelings or thoughts, but worried about their numbers and focusing on that kind of thing, which led to a more extreme version of that. Ritzer says that globalization took this to a new level and created, McDonaldization, which will be part of your short answer essay questions. But there's also a question about McJobs. So those are just jobs that are found through low skill service labor. So typically, those kind of like fast food jobs, jobs where you don't get paid well, you don't get vacations or benefits, and there's a lot of turnover. Temping in the workplace, just the idea that, you know, um, if you are a temp, you do not have health insurance, retirement plan, sick leave, all that stuff. It's basically everything that says right there, 21% of the US, blah, blah, blah. That's what the question's about. Institutional discrimination, just again, the definition there, there's just discrimination built in the operation of institutions. So, like, built into the economy or built into whatever. Let's see, structural functionalism versus conflict, social conflict. So, knowing the difference, right? What they focus on when it comes to inequality within work. So, you know, um, obviously, conflict is going to look at how inequality impacts society more than um, structural functionalism is going to really try and understand how each part of society is like a piece that fits into one whole mechanism, right? Like pieces of a puzzle that all fit together to make one whole. When it comes to feminist analysis of work and gender, all I'm looking for there is just that, typically um, there's certain gender segregation within the the labor market that means that jobs that are dominated by women tend to have less status and less pay. And when you look at that from like an intersectional or feminist analysis, you're going to see how um, even within that category, women of color are typically congregated or are stuck in the lowest paid positions within those fields. So it's not just our gender, it's also race, class, all of that stuff. Okay, so that's that. And then, so for the film, The House I Live In, why does the war on drugs continue? How is it related to politics? Right? So I want you to kind of look at why does the war continue, maybe the economic motives hint for why. And then how is it related to politics? Right? How is the beginning of the war on drugs related to politics? How is the continuance of the war on drugs related to politics? Hint, it totally is. Okay. Okay, so for number two, McDonaldization, what are its features? Give an example from your experience of McDonaldization. Okay, so McDonaldization, remember, it's got those four parts, right? So that's what I'm going to look for. In the definition, I want all four parts. I want you to say what the four are, like what are their features is the second part, right? So you can't just say simply efficiency, calculability, predictability, control, right? You're going to have to say what are its features, like how does it work, explain how it works. So you can't just, okay, and then give an example of it from your own life. Okay, so first, efficiency. We talked about this already before. The idea of you know of McDonaldization is that you're going to see the extreme process of rationalization. So for, if like using McDonald's as an example, Ritzer tried to explain this phenomenon. So basically, um, it actually goes all the way back to Henry Ford, but still, basically, what he's looking at is extreme rationalization. So efficiency just means that there's a method that is supposed to be the most efficient way of completing a task, right? So McDonald's breaks down each food item it makes into even smaller, rationalized out tasks that have been broken down to the smallest possible level. So, like, literally, when someone comes up to the window and orders something, right? There's a certain amount of time that it takes to, cook any of the food items, to do any of those things, right? And it's very rationalized. It's expected that, within a certain specific period of time, that food will be cooked and wrapped and ready to go in a bag in a drive-through, right? So, like oftentimes when you drive up through a drive-through window, you see there's a little clock and it's timing for you how long it's taking so that you have like a idea of what's, how much time is going by, how efficient it's being. Calculability is really this idea of focusing on quantity over quality. So quantity becomes the measurement of good performance. It doesn't matter if the burger tastes like crap. It matters that you sold 1 million of them. Like if you notice on the McDonald's arches, they always said like over how many millions sold. I mean now it's like billion or whatever. But yeah, so they focus on the quantity, not the quality. Um, and then predictability is the idea that every time you go to a McDonald's, no matter which one it is, and you pick a food item, it'll taste the same. It'll be the same at every place, which is kind of funny. I always make a joke about that because Del Taco is so not that way. Like there's good Del Tacos and bad Del Tacos. So it's funny how like they haven't quite mastered predictability. But yeah. And then control is the idea of trying to take as much power away from human people and putting it in the power of rationalization or computers. The control part also is about de-skilling the workforce, meaning that you're not teaching someone how to be a fry cook, right? Like in a diner where they're learning how to cook all these kind of things on the fly. They're learning a very specific rationalized process of push this button, put it precisely this scoop of this amount of this into this place, right? Like it basically takes away as much thought as possible, right? Anyway, it's sad. So, what I'm looking for as far as an example there, something that you've seen in your own life that hits all of these measures, where it's something that's supposed to be efficient, it's calculable, it's predictable, and there's a control element. So, I think the example I gave you guys was, I think the best one I've gotten from students, because I love those things, are food ordering apps, right? So, it's supposed to be efficient because you don't have to go into the store. You can order it right from your phone. You don't have to pull out a card out of your wallet. You pay straight through your phone or Apple Pay or whatever it is, right? So that's efficient. It's calculable because it's really just all about getting you in and out of the restaurant as quickly as possible. So they're just trying to sell as much crap as they can, basically, by promoting a convenience service to you. It's predictable because you basically, you put into your app what it is you want to buy, and what you receive is that. And basically, for a lot of those food ordering apps, what they'll do is they will, if you open it back up from a previous purchase, they will suggest, like, oh, do you want to buy this again? You bought this last time. Or sometimes they have upsell things within their, like, I know DoorDash does this because I'm kind of obsessed with DoorDash. And they have a thing like other people added this to their order, right? This kind of like trying to kind of almost like, I guess, I don't know how to, give you kind of a hint towards more consumerism. But really, just it's predictable in the way that you get exactly what's expected at the restaurant through the app. And then control because you're taking away talking to a human person. You don't have to like walk up to a counter and order, you don't have to wait in line, right? It's just through a computer so they can pay less people, they can give people less jobs so that we can have the convenience of carrying around a food app in our pocket all the time, right? So that's kind of my example of that. So that's what I'm looking for there. I'm looking for you to explain the four elements, what their features are. So don't just say it's efficient, right? Explain what does that mean and how does that relate to whatever. And then give an example from your experience and relate it to those four features. Alrighty, so this is the review. Hope it helps. Have a wonderful.